The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of all things. If the nameless is the origin of heaven and earth, and the named is the mother of myriad beings, then what happens in the space where these two extremes intersect? Is the deepest essence of existence precisely where all concepts dissolve, all names fall away, and thought can no longer sustain itself? In a civilization increasingly dominated by speed, by accumulated data rather than depth of contemplation, the most fundamental questions: what is humanity? What is the purpose of life? Is existence a privilege or a punishment? Are often dismissed as luxuries. People fear silence as they fear an abyss, for there is nothing left to cling to but oneself, bare and without an image to reflect upon. But if we dare to stand before that abyss without rushing to retreat, without filling it with logic or dogma, what then? Precisely in that emptiness, a different kind of light will emerge, not the dazzling light of proclaimed truth, but the silent illumination of a consciousness that no longer needs definition. This book does not aspire to present a system, much less a sermon. It is an experiment, an attempt to place fragments of Eastern thought often considered mystical, vague, or unscientific within an open structure. A space where the reader is not merely a recipient, but is compelled to confront themselves. Now, let's begin to summarize this book together. The day I understood emptiness, I stopped trying to become someone. I once ran frantically among faces, amidst praise and criticism, through fortress walls built of fame and success. I thought I was a person, but it turned out I was merely the shadow of my own desires, fears, and illusions. Until one day, I encountered emptiness. Emptiness is not a concept to debate, nor a doctrine to worship. It is a door without hinges, without a handle, without a sound. Once you step through, you are no longer yourself, and nothing remains of your former self. In my youth, I believed that having was the beginning of everything, that one needed money for freedom, education for respect, and morality to sleep peacefully each night. But then one night, amidst the wind whistling through a decaying wooden door, I heard a strange sound within myself. The nothing said nothing, yet it was present, and within that nothingness, I discovered a miraculous fullness that no material possession had ever provided. In Eastern philosophy, especially through the eyes of Lao Tzu, emptiness is not a meaningless void. It is the fundamental essence of existence, like the hub of a wheel where all the spokes converge. It is that empty space that allows the wheel to turn. Like a room, where people live not within the brick walls, but in the empty space between those four walls. And like a cup, what gives it value is not the surrounding glass, but the empty space within that holds water. All these point to one truth: true value lies in nothingness. I remember once watching a potter. He spun the soft, wet clay in his hands to form a vase. I asked, "What makes this vase?" He smiled, pointed to the empty space in the center, and said, "This is where the wine is held." I was speechless. For so many years studying philosophy, no one had ever taught me such profound wisdom. And that is emptiness, the nothingness that creates everything. From then on, I began to live differently. I no longer jostled to speak in debates. I listened more, and I realized that most of what people said was not to understand each other, but to be recognized. Each person's ego always wants to be present, but in that noisy presence, the only thing lost is truth. Eastern Daoist teachings do not speak through logic, they speak through silence. You cannot hear it if you are trying to listen. But if you let go, stop trying, stop demanding, stop judging, then one day, the Tao will speak through your own silence. Chuang called this empty mind. The mind is like a calm lake, reflecting both blue skies and stormy clouds without being disturbed. One with an empty mind is not cold or indifferent. On the contrary, they are capable of feeling everything without being carried away. They see a falling flower and know that spring is turning to summer. They hear a dog bark at night and know a distant loved one is about to return. But they do not cling to what they see. They simply let it pass, like the wind through a rice field, like moonlight over water. I once asked a Zen master, "How does one achieve empty mind?" He didn't answer. He simply handed me a full glass of water, then slowly poured more water into it. When the water overflowed, he looked at me and smiled gently, saying, "To receive more, you must first empty some out." That statement stayed with me for years. To achieve the Tao is not to accumulate more knowledge, but to shed, to shed the desire to win or lose, to shed definitions, names, and even the ambition to become someone. For in the Tao, there is no one. There is only what is. The greatest paradox of emptiness is that it creates everything, yet takes nothing. It is the mother of the universe, yet gives no call to itself. And that is what I deeply admire. When you live like emptiness, you don't need fame, yet you are present everywhere. You don't need to win, yet you bring harmony to all things. You don't need to say anything, yet your presence brings peace to others. I once believed in light, in reason, in clarity. But it was in the darkness, in those bewildering moments of not knowing where to go, that I rediscovered myself. Not the self defined by diplomas or social status, but the primal self, solitary, vulnerable, yet full of life. Have you ever looked at a tree and realized that its most crucial part, its roots, lies hidden beneath the earth out of sight? Yet it is that invisible part that nourishes all that is visible above. The Tao is the same, and emptiness is that root. No one praises it, no one speaks of it, but without it, nothing can exist. In my youth, I had a friend who was a violinist. He told me that when performing, what truly mattered wasn't the notes themselves, but the silences between them. I looked at him, puzzled. He just smiled, closed his eyes, and played a short piece. In that music, each pause resonated like a breath, and I understood. It is the silence amidst the sounds that gives the music its soul. In the same way, emptiness gives soul to the universe. We live in an age where everything is dominated by having. People rush to buy, to accumulate, to build up their egos. It's all about having knowledge, having possessions, having a voice, having influence. But amidst all this having, I see people becoming increasingly empty. They have everything, but they don't have themselves. They do many things, but don't understand why they do them, and the more they live, the more lost they become. I was once like that, until I learned to return to the nothingness. That nothingness is not an act of abandoning or denying life. On the contrary, it is a profound understanding of life's ultimate nature. When you understand that everything you try to hold onto will eventually disappear, you will let go. But not letting go in helplessness, rather letting go with gratitude. You no longer resent loss, because you know that loss itself makes life precious. Chuang once told a story about a fisherman. Every morning, he would row his boat onto the river and sit for hours, motionless, watching the water without casting his line. Someone asked, "Aren't you fishing?" He replied, "The fish may come or they may not, I simply need to live." The other person scoffed, thinking him mad. But I understood. That fisherman had touched the Tao because he no longer sought anything. And precisely when you stop seeking, everything comes to you naturally. The more you try to grasp something, the more it slips away. The more you try to define it, the more you lose what cannot be put into words. Like looking at a flame, you cannot catch it, you cannot shape it. You can only warm yourself by silently standing near it. The Tao is similar. It is the quiet fire burning in the night, calling no one, taking no space, yet anyone who approaches feels warmth in their heart. People often ask me, "Is emptiness a goal?" I reply, "No, emptiness is not a destination. It is a state you realize when you are no longer running anywhere." Like someone in the middle of a desert, weary from searching for an oasis, who suddenly stops, closes their eyes, and discovers water right beneath their feet. No one showed him, no map marked the spot. Only silence and letting go revealed that insight. Those who live with emptiness are not world renouncers. They live within the world working, loving, suffering, but everything passes through them without clinging. They are like a mirror that reflects but retains nothing, like the wind that passes through but leaves no trace. They are present but do not interfere. They help but do not attach. They are silent yet more profound than any voice. Fate led me to an old man who sold tea in the high mountains. Every day, he would boil water for tea, then sit alone, watching the clouds. I asked him, "Don't you feel lonely?" He said, "I am not alone. The clouds are speaking to me." I smiled, but then, in a moment of silence, I realized he spoke the truth, for he lived in the nothingness, and that nothingness contained everything. You know, when you live in emptiness, you don't need to become anyone. You don't need external validation to know who you are, because you have already become yourself. A self nameless, formless, boundless. It is a profound presence that cannot be expressed in words, but anyone who meets you feels it. And strangely, precisely when you stop trying to be special, you become unique. Because no one can imitate a person who lives with emptiness. They have no template, no method, no curriculum. They are simply themselves. Like water is water, like wind is wind. One time, I meditated under an ancient bodhi tree in the courtyard of an old temple. A gentle rain fell, each drop pattering like the heartbeat of heaven and earth. I sought nothing, wished for nothing, simply sat in silence. And in that silence, I heard the whisper of the wind through the leaves, the breath of the earth, and my own voice no longer speaking. That was when I understood. Emptiness is not somewhere far away. It is right there, in the moment you stop trying. It comes not because you call it, but because you stop calling. Someone asked if living according to emptiness meant living passively, doing nothing. I simply smiled. For nothing is more vibrant than a person living in emptiness. They are not blinded by desires, so they clearly see what needs to be done. They are not swayed by fame, so they act without expectation. They are not entangled by results, so they act with a quiet completeness. They are the ones who do the most, yet no one knows it, like an underground stream that nourishes an entire forest without anyone ever seeing its surface. What I admire most in Eastern wisdom is not its lofty theories, but its simplicity to the point of being unnoticed. Lao Tzu said, "The great Tao is like water. Water contends with no one, yet it softens stone. Water holds no fixed shape, yet it adapts everywhere it goes. Water does not seek the high ground but always flows to the low. And precisely because of this, it is something that nothing can break." I once tried to live like water, and the first thing I learned was silence. Silence is not about not speaking, but about knowing when to speak and from where to speak. When you speak from the ego, from a desire to be understood, to be right, those words carry a heavy weight. But when you speak from emptiness, that is, from know where the words are light as clouds, yet they stir as deeply as early morning dew. Listeners will not react, they will feel. They won't know why, but they will find peace in their hearts. That is the power of words born from emptiness. I once witnessed a heated argument between two scholars. Each had their reasons, full of evidence and classical citations. They argued over every word, corrected each other's every fault. In the end, neither convinced the other, only exhaustion and distance remained. The next day, I recounted the story to a Zen master. He simply smiled, "Both are right, and precisely because of that, both are wrong." I was stunned, for I understood that in the Tao, there is no right or wrong, there is only what is. And if you try to turn what is into an argument, you have already lost it. Once I walked through a garden after a rain and saw a butterfly resting on a leaf still beaded with water. It didn't flutter its wings or fly away, it simply stood motionless, as if listening to something only it could hear. I stood watching, I don't know for how long. I only knew that when the butterfly flew away, I felt something in my heart had been returned to me. A wholeness, nameless, purposeless, just pure presence. And I thought, that is emptiness. When you live long enough with emptiness, you begin to feel the pulse of all things. You see autumn not as a season, but as a breath of heaven and earth. You see death not as an end, but as a silent retreat making way for new birth. You no longer view things as random or unfair. You see that every event, every person, every sorrow carries its own rhythm. And if you are silent long enough, you will hear that music. But to hear it does not mean to control it. You are merely the listener. You are not the conductor. Emptiness does not give you power, it gives you understanding. And in that understanding, you cease to control. You no longer wish to change anyone, fix anything, or win or lose anything. You simply live like a flowing river, like falling leaves, like drifting clouds without sorrow, without joy, without needing a reason. Just is. I know many will not understand what I am saying, for they are still searching, and I do not blame them. Everyone must pass through confusion before seeing clarity. But if even one person reads this far and feels their heart soften, then I know I have spoken what needed to be said. For emptiness is not meant to be proven. It is only meant to be transmitted, like a small seed that needs no one to see it, but will sprout on a day when the sun is calm enough and the wind gentle enough. In my later years, I developed a habit of waking very early each morning, brewing a pot of green tea, and then sitting to watch the sunrise through the scattered mist on the hills. That moment was nothing special. No background music, no conversations, no urgent tasks to complete, just me. The warmth of the tea, the bird song, and the silent movement of the universe. But precisely in that nothingness, I found everything. What was most valuable in my entire life as a scholar, a writer, a student of the Tao? I would not speak of lectures, awards, or books. I would tell you about the fleeting moment where I sat silently and was no one at all. Where I didn't try to understand, to prove, to leave a mark, but simply existed as a tiny speck of dust, like a nameless yet free whisper of wind. That is the pinnacle of emptiness. Emptiness is not an endpoint. It does not terminate anything. On the contrary, it is an infinite unfolding. When you let go of everything, you do not vanish. You dissolve like water into earth, like moonlight into a lake, to become part of everything. There are no longer boundaries between you and the world. You no longer see life. You are asterisk life. Western philosophers often begin with the question, who am I? But in Eastern Daoist teachings, people do not ask, because the more you ask, the more you assert that there is some fixed I standing outside, observing. But if you let all questions pass, let all notions settle like sediment sinking to the bottom of water, then what remains is not an answer, but a luminous silence. Within that, there is no I, but there is an understanding so profound it needs no articulation. Once I visited a small hermitage in the mountains where a Taoist recluse lived. I asked, "What is the Tao?" He didn't answer, he just poured tea. I asked again. He silently placed the teacup before me. I became annoyed, yet he still said nothing. Then he pointed to the window where light shone through the mist, just that. And I suddenly understood, the Tao is not something that can be spoken. The more you speak of it, the further it recedes. It can only be lived. And those who live the Tao no longer need to lecture about it. Emptiness is the foundation for all virtues. Without emptiness, compassion becomes pity. Wisdom becomes arrogance, silence becomes empty quietude. Only when you stand from a place of nothingness does every action, every word, every gesture become a natural part of the cosmic order. You no longer asterisk do what is right, you are what is right. You don't asterisk help asterisk people. You asterisk are a presence that brings peace to others, effortlessly, without form, just absolute presence. And if I could impart just one thing to you, who are reading these lines, I would offer no advice at all. I would simply say, don't rush, don't run, don't try to achieve anything sacred. For right here in what you already possess this moment, this breath, this weariness, this joy or sorrow, the Tao is already contained. You just need to stop and look deeply within, like standing before a still mirror, or listening to the sound of grass growing from the earth. In that silence, you will see emptiness smiling at you. You won't be able to describe it, nor will you need to, because from now on, you will no longer need a reason to live. You will simply live. No one may see you differently, but you will know you are changed because you are no longer searching. You have come home. Many years ago, I asked an old painter, what makes a painting have soul? He didn't answer immediately. He just took out an old ink wash painting, hung it on the wall, and sat silently opposite it. I looked and looked. The painting had only a few smudged ink strokes, a black dot like a silent figure amidst a mist-shrouded mountainside. The rest was white, a vast empty space, nothing drawn. After a long while, he finally said, "The soul lies in the nothingness." I was speechless, and from that day I began my journey to understand why this nothingness, this emptiness, is precisely the soul of art. When Westerners think of art, they often think of expressing colors, shapes, sounds, words. But in Eastern aesthetics, art does not aim to express, but to lead to the inexpressible. To paint is not to showcase talent, but to open a space for the viewer to enter. To write a poem is not to say something, but to evoke something that words cannot convey. Emptiness in art is not a lack, but a silent presence. Like music, without rests, all notes become noise. Like poetry, without silence between two lines, emotions become stifled with no space to unfurl. Art is not the technique of filling, but the art of knowing when to stop, allowing the nothingness to emerge. Once I watched an ancient Japanese no play. The actors barely moved, the dialogue was so minimal it was merely a whisper. Costumes were not ostentatious, the lighting was dim. Yet in that stillness, I saw a storm, not outside, but within. What remained unsaid was what haunted me, and I realized the beauty of emptiness lies in it not asserting itself, not trying to impress you. It allows you to discover yourself in its absence. Chuang once recounted a strange story. A talented painter was invited by a king to draw a dragon. After 3 years, he had drawn nothing, and the king grew angry. But when he finally put brush to paper, with just a few strokes, the dragon appeared, vibrant without needing details. The soul lay in restraint. A single stroke was not just one stroke, but 1,000 strokes that had been omitted. It was the asterisk undrawn that made the drawing breathe. I call it the skill of no skill. Painting as if not painting. When I write, there are times I delete more than I write. A passage, after being refined, no longer has many words, yet it leaves a profound aftertaste. I learned to be silent within the words, so that the words spoke less, and the space between the words spoke more. For I know readers don't read with their eyes, but with their hearts, and the heart can only listen in stillness. True art is not where the artist displays themselves. It is a space where the reader, the viewer, the listener can encounter themselves. And for that to happen, the artist must step back, must disappear from the work, like a Taoist hermit blending into the forest, leaving no footprint. Yet anyone who passes through feels something present, quiet, encompassing, nameless. I once visited a Zen temple in Korea, where a Buddha statue carved from a single block of stone stood in the courtyard, without decoration, flowers, or incense. A meditating student standing nearby said, "We leave the statue like this because we don't want anyone to confuse the image with the essence." I nodded, because true beauty needs no embellishment, and if you embellish too much, you kill the delicate life within it. Emptiness teaches us this, to know when to stop, to retreat, to remove so that the remaining nothingness has room to breathe. And when I listened to an ancient Japanese piece of music consisting of only a few scattered bamboo flute sounds, interspersed with breathtaking long silences, I suddenly understood. It is that very intermittence that gives meaning to sound, just as in life. If there were no death, no one would cherish life. If there were no silence, all words would be hollow. And if there were no emptiness, art would be nothing but soulless stuffing. A haiku, just 3 lines, a dewdrop on a bent blade of grass before sunrise. That's all. No philosophy, no explanation, no emotions expressed. But when I read it, I felt my heart quiet, like still water. I saw a moment, something fleeting like light filtering through leaves, like life breathing softly between 2 heartbeats. And I realized that what was unsaid in that poem resonated longer than any noisy epic. That absence, that pause, that is emptiness. I once met an old calligrapher who spent his entire life writing calligraphy. He didn't use fancy paper or precious ink, just a coarse wooden brush, thin ink, and plain paper. Yet his strokes had a weight that no other brush could achieve. I asked him his secret. He smiled and said, "Before you write, you must erase yourself." I didn't understand. He continued, "If there is still self in your hand, the characters will have form but no soul." Then he poured tea, saying nothing more. I sat silently, watching the still wet ink slowly absorb into the paper, quiet and simple just like him. And I understood. Calligraphy lies not in the brushstrokes, but in the asterisk chi asterisk, the vital energy. That which makes the characters live only appears when the writer is no one at all. They have dissolved like ink into water, like wind into the forest. The characters, therefore, are no longer mere characters, but the presence of someone who has vanished. Once I attended an independent film screening in Kyoto. It was a black and white film with no background music, almost no dialogue, with long, slow scenes. Sometimes it seemed like nothing was happening, yet the entire theater was utterly silent when the film ended. No one applauded, nor did anyone leave immediately. I sat there, looking at the white light at the end of the film, and felt a strange fullness in my heart. Even though I couldn't remember what the film had just said, I believed it was art born from emptiness. The longer I engaged in art, the more I found that nothingness was the hardest part. You can learn to write well, draw skillfully, express emotions, but to know when to stop, to leave a white space, a silence, an emptiness that cannot be taught by anyone. You must learn it yourself through solitude, through failure, through the realization that what you want to say is not as important as what you dare to leave unsaid. Once, I spent weeks writing a passage, revising it over and over. Then one day, I deleted everything, keeping only one sentence. Last night, the moon tilted over the thatched roof. It didn't say what the character thought, didn't describe the scene, didn't analyze psychology, just a single image that said more than 100 lines. Not because I was skillful, but because I learned to retreat and let emptiness do the rest. The great Tao does not speak, yet all who hear understand. The great Tao does not act, yet all things are born. The great Tao does not arrive, yet it is present everywhere. That statement, for me, is also the principle for all profound art. A beautiful cup is not defined by its lines, but by the empty space between its walls and its rim. That statement made me ponder deeply, because in modern society, we are taught to fill everything. Fill our schedules, fill debates, fill social media pages, even fill the emptiness in our hearts with words, with recognition, with noise. But in true art, the empty space is the most sacred place. I have seen paintings full of details that left no impression. I have also seen paintings with just a few strokes that moved viewers to tears. And I believe the difference lies in emptiness, in the artist's ability to step back. When an artist no longer seeks to prove anything, that is when the artwork begins to live its own life, like a seed germinating in dark soil. It needs no one to awaken it, no spotlight, silently yet persistently. I once went through a period where I couldn't write a single line. Ideas weren't lacking, emotions were still present. But when I picked up the pen, every word felt false. I reread what I had written before and found it full of technique. Correct rhythm, proper syntax, apt imagery, yet it lacked something invisible as soul, something that couldn't be named. I used to believe that creativity was the result of diligent practice and hard work. But then I understood there is a deeper layer of creativity where you don't do asterisk, but are asterisk done to asterisk. During a 10-day meditation retreat, I sat silently in a secluded forest, with no paper, no pen, no thoughts about my work. And suddenly, on the 7th day, an idea surged within me like a cool stream in the desert. No one called it, no one invited it, but it was clearly present, coherent, profound as if it had always been there, just waiting for me to be silent enough to hear it. Meditation didn't teach me to write better. It taught me to disappear. And in that disappearance, art began to breathe. No longer the creative I, no longer the struggle, only the flow like bamboo reaching high without striving, like a flower blooming effortlessly, still diffusing its fragrance. That is Eastern creativity. Non-interference, non-coercion, non-performance, just alignment. A painter friend of mine once said, "When you paint with too much technique, the painting will be beautiful but dead. But if you let your hand tremble a little, let the ink smudge a little, the painting will live." At first I thought he was joking, but then I tried it. I painted without sketching, without defining, just letting my hand follow my breath. And I saw that within imperfection, there was a quiet perfection. The wrong made the right more human. The lack was precisely the abundance. Eastern Daoist teachings always speak of wu-y asterisk non-action, yet all things are done. Westerners often hear this with skepticism. Then who is responsible? But those who live in the Tao understand that actions stemming from the ego always carry consequences. Actions stemming from nothingness without ambition, without manipulation are as perfect as a dewdrop falling precisely onto a leaf at the right moment. An artist living in the spirit of emptiness does not aim for achievement. They don't try to leave a mark. They are simply a flowing stream, sometimes dry, sometimes overflowing. They do not control, but it is precisely this lack of control that gives rise to sacred moments where art speaks for itself untaught. Have you ever experienced writing a sentence, then reading it back and not believing you wrote it not because it was brilliant, but because it was so true that you suspected some deeply silent part of you had written it for you? That is emptiness operating through you. That is the nameless presence. And from then on, I no longer feared writer's block. I no longer forced myself to be creative every day. I simply observed in silence, listening to life's whispers, like someone gathering pebbles by a stream, not searching for anything, but occasionally finding a beautiful one. I let art come as rain falls on an old tiled roof, unbidden, uninvited, but very real. Ancient craftspeople often said, when making a ceramic piece, don't think about the user, don't think about the market, don't think about judgment. Just let your hands touch the clay with gratitude. That's not a skill, it's an attitude, a complete presence. And from that presence, every line acquires a soul. Not because of cleverness, but because of truth. Once, during a lecture, I told my students, if you want to write a great poem, go garden first. They laughed, thinking I was joking, but in truth, when you learn to pull weeds, carry water, listen to the croaking of frogs at night, and smell the damp earth, you learn slowness, stillness, and life, and that is where poetry begins. When I was young, I thought art was about leaving a mark, the more impactful, the longer remembered. I tried to write philosophical sentences, draw truly distinct shapes, play music unconventionally, and I gained attention. People discussed, quoted, and praised me. But then one day, I looked back at those works and saw me asterisk the me that wanted to be seen, affirmed, prominent, not life, not flow, not truth. Then I met an old gardener. He grew vegetable beds year-round, without chemical fertilizers, without machinery, just his hands, soil, and patience. I asked him why he didn't plant more flowers for beauty. He said, "Flowers are beautiful, but people just come, admire them, and leave. Vegetables stay and nourish people." I understood then that there is a resonant beauty and a quiet beauty. There is art for display and art for living. Emptiness in art is precisely that quiet beauty. Not noisy, not vying to be right, not yearning for superiority. It is a harmony with the natural flow, where the creator does not resist nor control, but breathes along with all things. Like a boatman who doesn't row against the current, but learns to read the water, read the wind, and then lets the boat move forward most naturally. A little boy drew with his finger in the sand, just scribbling lines then erasing them, not preserving, not shaping. But in that moment, he lived truly with the creative impulse, without thought of results. And I silently thought, this is the pure archetype of art, for no reason at all, just because life wants to manifest through a form, then vanish. Eastern Daoist teachings make no distinction between high and low art. A poem, a dish, a gesture, a breath can all be art if the creator is fully present, lets go of the ego, and allows the nothingness to operate through them. A basket weaver doesn't need to know philosophy, but if each weave is imbued with mindfulness, that basket will carry the asterisk chi asterisk of the Tao. A soup cook doesn't need to study aesthetics, but if they season with stillness, that soup will nourish not just the body, but also the mind. And that is what makes emptiness supreme in art. It doesn't demand that you become anyone, doesn't require diplomas or adherence to standards. It only demands that you be honest with yourself, and honesty is not easy. For you must overcome countless layers of masks, layers of expectations, layers of should-bes. But once you touch the nothingness, you will find freedom. And in that freedom, you will create like breathing, without pressure, without illusion, without ambition. I passed by a dilapidated temple, where a stone Buddha statue was so worn that its facial features were no longer clear. But I stood there for a long time, not because the statue was beautiful, but because in its erosion, there was an unnamed solemnity, as if time had touched the statue with gratitude. And I thought, peak art is when even time itself cannot bear to destroy it, because there is nothing left to destroy, only the nothingness remains, and nothingness is imperishable. When I look back at my life, so many years of writing, so many works, so many words, what remains clearest is not what I did but what I refused to do. The sentences I deleted, the ideas I let pass, the times I sat silently before a blank page without forcing myself to write anything. In those moments, I was not the author. I was merely the guardian of the empty space, the one who cleared a path for emptiness to enter. Is it possible to live a creative life without clinging to the ego? Yes, but you will have to learn to accept being forgotten, to accept being the background, to accept allowing the work to live its own life without your name attached, to accept writing a sentence no one remembers, yet it soothes someone's heart at 2 a.m., to accept drawing a stroke that only you understand, to accept retreating without anyone seeing you off, and if you can accept all of that, you will be free. Art born from emptiness leaves no applause, but an aftertaste. It doesn't dazzle like fireworks, but is quiet like the aroma of tea lingering in the throat. It doesn't overwhelm people, but makes them pause, breathe deeper, live a little slower, and that alone is enough. It took me almost half my life to understand that knowing is one thing. Living with that knowing is an entirely different matter. I used to lecture on emptiness, write about the empty mind, quote Lao Tzu, discuss Chuang Tzu, my words as beautiful as poetry, arguments flowing with abundant evidence. But then one night, facing a personal loss, I found myself panicked, clinging, in pain, and angry, like someone who had never read a single sacred text. That so-called understanding, it turned out, was just a theoretical cloak covering an inner nakedness and vulnerability. I realized that the journey from understanding to being was a profound abyss, and I had to learn all over again from the very beginning. And so I went searching no longer for words, but for the path, no longer reading but listening, no longer questioning but observing. And I began with something seemingly simple: how does the mind become empty? The first thing I realized was that it cannot be forced. You cannot compel the mind to be empty, just as you cannot order the surface of water to stop rippling. You can only stop all interference, then let it settle naturally. It is not an act of doing, but an act of ceasing, not adding but subtracting, not advancing but retreating. Like learning to play the flute, it's not about learning more techniques, but about learning to release your breath correctly. Like a mountain climber, it's not about climbing higher, but about shedding unnecessary baggage. Only when you have nothing left to hold on to does the mind have space to be empty. Chuang Tzu called this using the mind like a mirror. A mirror does not hold onto images. Anyone who passes by sees themselves in it, but no one leaves a trace. The mirror reflects everything without clinging. The empty mind is such a mirror. It sees everything, feels everything, but holds on to nothing. When joy comes, it smiles. When sorrow comes, it is silent. When gossip comes, it observes. When love comes, it opens. All are welcomed, but none are permitted to stay. You might think this is indifference, but no, it is the pinnacle of compassion. One with an empty mind does not try to control others, does not interfere, does not correct, does not instruct. They let others be themselves, like a tree growing on its own, like water flowing naturally. They do not love conditionally. They do not give from a position of power. They do not help to receive in return. And precisely because of this, their presence is as light as the wind, yet as deep as the earth. I once tried practicing empty mind in the simplest way, observing the person opposite me without judgment, without labeling them. Not good, not bad, not clever, not clumsy, just looking as if seeing a passing cloud. At first, it was very difficult because the habit of labeling was deeply ingrained. But after a few practices, I began to see that when you don't judge anyone, you start to see who they truly are, not through the lens of prejudice, but through their pure presence. And the strange thing is, when you look at others with an empty mind, they naturally awaken the beauty within themselves. I also tried practicing empty mind with myself, and that was the real challenge. I realized I was the harshest critic of myself. Every failure, I tormented myself. Every mistake, I agonized. I didn't allow myself to be weak, to be confused, to be simply human. And then one day, I sat before a mirror, looked into my own eyes, and said nothing at all, just looked without judgment. And I burst into tears, not from pain, but because for the first time, I allowed myself to be completely, unconditionally. And that is empty mind, not just towards the world, but towards ourselves. It is when you no longer force yourself to become anyone. It is when you stop fighting the darkness within. It is when you let all emotions pass like waves, neither resisting nor chasing them. It is when you sit within yourself as if in a wild forest, not arranging, not gardening, not felling trees, not building shelters, just listening to the wind through the leaves and letting the forest be the forest. For a period, I practiced walking in silence, not for relaxation, nor to display spiritual practice, but to examine each step as a test for empty mind. Each morning, I walked in the garden without my phone, without thinking about work, without planning, without utilizing time, just stepping, just breathing, just being present. It seemed simple, but it turned out to be the most profound lesson I ever learned. Because when you walk without a destination, every step becomes sacred. When you don't walk to get somewhere, you can truly touch the earth. I vividly remember the feeling of my bare feet on dew-kissed grass, the slight chill seeping up, my heel gently touching, then lifting like a bird's wing, unhurried. Each step was an act of letting go. You were no longer striving for anything. You simply accompanied the earth, and the earth began to answer. You will notice something strange. When you walk with an empty mind, everything becomes your companion. A dry leaf is also a voice. An ant walking in the opposite direction is also a lesson. You will no longer see the world as an object to be conquered, but as a current of life to be understood. And then, you begin to truly listen. Listening is another practice to embody empty mind. Listening is not waiting for the other person to finish so you can reply, but dismantling all preconceptions, all preparations, all systems of classification to receive what is coming as it is. You don't need to agree, you don't need to refute, you just need to open your heart like a vast sky. And you will see that the person opposite you doesn't need advice, they only need a space quiet enough to be themselves. When you listen with an empty mind, others will hear their own voice, a voice they had long lost. I sat beside a dying man. He didn't say much, he just held my hand, and I didn't know what to say either. At that moment, all philosophies became meaningless, all words of comfort felt hollow. I simply sat and breathed with him, and when he closed his eyes for the last time, I felt that nothing was lost. There was only a transition, like a wind changing direction. Empty mind is like that. No regret, no clinging, no evasion, just pure acceptance, an unbound presence. Practicing empty mind sometimes means daring to live amidst life without trying to impress, without needing to leave a trace, without needing to win any argument, without needing to be right, without needing to be remembered. Just living like water, flowing silently through all forms, not asserting itself as water, not demanding recognition. And like water, you will wear down stone, soothe fire, and lift countless nameless boats. But be careful, for living with an empty mind does not mean abandoning the world. On the contrary, you will love this world more because you no longer want to possess it. You will help others more because you don't need their gratitude. You will engage more deeply, but with the lightness of one not pulled by motives. Every action will stem from stillness. And precisely because of this, that action will leave no aftershocks, will not burn the doer, nor harm the receiver. You will begin to understand why ancient sages often smiled much and spoke little. For when the mind is empty, all things become light. Sorrow is no longer an abyss but a cool shade. Joy is no longer a crescendo but a gentle warmth. All things are just enough, no more, no less, like a piece of music descending to the perfect bass note, like the last light of day needing no brilliance. You will seem ordinary but not mundane, simple but not dull, tranquil but not cold. A student asked me, "How do I know if I'm truly living with an empty mind and not just deceiving myself?" I told them, "Observe how you react when criticized. If you shrink back, get angry, try to defend, try to fix, then you are still living by the ego. But if you listen without anger, without sorrow, and without trying to appear compassionate, just quietly receiving, then you are moving closer to an empty mind. For an empty mind is not a good mind. It has no attributes, no color, needs no proof. It is the space before all prejudices, the white canvas before the painting appears. It doesn't need to be anything at all, because it is already complete in being nothing at all. That is it." Someone once asked me how to apply empty mind to love. That question made me silent for a long time, because love, by its very nature, is one of the last places where the ego clings most tenaciously. When we love someone, we often don't just love them, but the version of them we expect. We love our own reflection in their eyes, and when that reflection no longer aligns, we suffer not because love is lost, but because the image we attach to that love collapses. But if you love with an empty mind, you love like a mirror reflecting water. Water comes, reflects, water goes, leaving no trace. You don't love to possess. You don't love for the other person to understand you. You don't love to exchange for a title, a promise, or an outcome. You simply love like the wind loves the forest, like rain loves a tiled roof, like the moon shining over a river without ever touching it. You demand nothing in return because the love you carry within your heart is already complete. It may sound detached, but in reality, it is the pinnacle of freedom. You can love someone passionately, but if they leave, you don't collapse. Not because you don't feel pain, but because you don't cling to that pain as an identity. It comes, you let it come. It goes, you let it go. And in its going, you remain whole because you were never dependent on anyone's existence to define yourself. Empty mind in love is not cold. On the contrary, it is a space where the other person is allowed to be themselves. Not forced to be better, not transformed to fit. They are loved as they are, with both their beauty and their darkness. You don't try to fix them, develop them, or mold them into a better version to fit the story in your head. You love them as the sky loves a tree. Whether the tree lives or dies, the sky remains wide open. If two people live with empty mind and love each other, then that is a love without ripples, without crescendos, without drama, just a parallel presence, like two rivers flowing side by side. Not striving to merge, not fearing separation, simply flowing together, that alone is enough to soften life. When failure strikes, how does one maintain an empty mind? I have failed many times in academia, in my career, in relationships. Each time I failed, I felt stripped bare, all my masks crumbling. And in that moment, I truly saw myself as tiny, vulnerable, afraid, and fragile as a dragonfly's wing caught in a storm. If I had still clung to my successful self then, I would have collapsed. But it was precisely in failure that I learned the most about empty mind. Empty mind is when you stand amidst ruin and don't try to rebuild. You watch everything crumble without needing explanations, without rushing to find fault, without making excuses, just breathing and saying, "All right, I am here, I accept." Then from there you walk, not because you have asterisk to start over, but because you have been liberated. There is nothing left to protect, no image to uphold. You become light, and that lightness is the beginning of a new journey, no longer driven by fear or expectation. After losing everything, no human voices, no projects, no plans, I remember smiling, not because I was optimistic, but because for the first time I had nothing left to strive for. I was simply naked, and that I didn't need to be good, to be right, to be outstanding. I simply was asterisk, and that feeling was as peaceful as a waveless lake. Empty mind is also when you are misunderstood and don't need to explain yourself, when you are attacked and don't need to retaliate, when you see wrongdoing and don't need to intervene. Not because you are cowardly, but because you have learned. Everything in life has its own path to self-correction. You simply need not to derail that trajectory with the haste of impulsive kindness or the anger masquerading as justice. And then you walk lightly, as if never harmed. Not because you are strong, but because you no longer cling to wounds as an ego needing protection. You let everything fall away from you like leaves from a branch. No holding on, no regret, no need for the wind's sigh. And then there will come a time when you ask yourself, living with an empty mind like this, will I be overwhelmed by life, seen as weak, indifferent, or avoiding reality? I once asked myself that, once feared that if I let go, others would impose upon me. If I didn't speak, falsehoods would triumph. If I didn't contend, error would spread. But then I learned something from nature. Grass doesn't need to raise its voice to keep growing, the wind doesn't need to declare itself to keep blowing. And darkness never contends, yet it is always where light is born. The Tao is not separation. One who lives the Tao doesn't necessarily have to retreat to mountains or caves, abandoning life. On the contrary, one with an empty mind can live amidst life without being swept away by it. They are in the marketplace, but their heart is not for sale. They engage in politics, but their mind is not deceitful. They love, but do not crave. They suffer, but do not collapse. They commit, but do not get stuck. Like a lotus growing from mud, yet unstained by the mud stench. I encountered an old doctor. He treated thousands of people each year, accepting no envelopes, needing no gratitude, working as naturally as breathing. When patients came, he observed not just their symptoms, but also the lines on their faces, how they sat, the look in their eyes when they spoke. He didn't rush to prescribe medicine. Sometimes he would simply ask, "Has anything happened recently that made you lose your appetite?" Then, in silence, the patient would burst into tears. He wasn't a Zen master. He was simply someone who had lived long with an empty mind. So he didn't cure diseases, he helped people heal themselves. Living with an empty mind is not about abandoning action, but about doing everything from absolute purity, without hidden agendas, without manipulation. No need to take credit, just do what needs to be done. Like rain arriving in season, without fanfare. Like leaves falling in their month, without complaint. When done, leave no trace, no need for anyone to know, no need to be remembered. For those who live in emptiness know that nothing truly belongs to them, and that is the deepest relief in human life. You will recognize a person with an empty mind when they are peaceful amidst chaos, not because they are hardened, but because they see through the layers of emotional waves. They do not chase the crowd, nor do they resist it. They simply walk to their own rhythm, and strangely, that rhythm aligns with the rhythm of heaven and earth, because they are no longer pushed by external forces, nor pulled by internal desires. They are a still point, around which the universe revolves without being off-center. And I thought about death, the final passage for everyone. I once witnessed someone depart with a strange serenity, no last words, no regrets, no clinging. When his children and grandchildren came to his bedside, he simply smiled, held each of their hands, then closed his eyes. I asked him, "Aren't you afraid?" He replied, "If one lives without clinging, what is there to leave in death?" I was silent, for he wasn't philosophizing. He simply lived with an empty mind until his very last second. Humility, compassion, wisdom, freedom without an empty mind, all other good qualities can easily be distorted into showing off, controlling, trying to appear good. Only when you have nothing left to prove do all your actions become true. You don't need to reach a state of complete emptiness today. Just start with a small act, a conscious breath, an unhurried step, a gentle response, an act of forgiveness without waiting for an apology. Each such act is a brushstroke on the invisible painting of the Tao. And day by day, you will find yourself living lighter, listening deeper, feeling what has never been named. And then, one very ordinary morning, when you open your eyes with no questions in your head, nothing to rush for, and see the sunlight on your hands, you will smile, because you will know your mind is empty, and in that emptiness, you have everything. Thank you for dedicating your time, your attention, and the stillness of your mind to accompany me on this journey. In a world where speed overwhelms depth, and noise easily overshadows silence, your patient listening to these final lines is not merely an act of reading, it is a way of life. I do not expect these pages to give you a complete system of thought, nor do I hope you remember every concept. If there is anything worth retaining, it is perhaps a space of silence that you have felt within yourself. A strange sense of the unnameable, yet intimately close to your own breath. If you can listen to life with emptier ears, look at a falling leaf without rushing to assign meaning, or forgive someone without needing a reason, then this book has fulfilled its mission. I also sincerely hope you will leave a few words of reflection, not to bolster the book's value, but to open a dimension of dialogue, because each person, in reading this book, will receive a distinct current of the Tao. No two are alike. You, the reader, the listener, are the one who completes this text by how you understand it, live with it, and transcend it. Finally, I do not wish for you to find truth, for truth is not something that can be found or held. I only hope you can maintain a small space within your heart where you are courageous enough not to know, silent enough to listen, and profound enough to need to say nothing at all. For now, goodbye, and until we meet again.